The War Council chamber aboard the Sovereign Reach buzzed with aggressive energy as Fleet Admiral Grenk reviewed the holographic display. 3 days had passed since the humans transmitted their warning, and the Empire's most decorated commanders gathered to laugh at the audacity. Ambassador Dreth of the Morveni species stood at the central podium, his four arms gesturing dismissively at the recorded message from Earth. "They claim we must halt our expansion," Dreth announced, his voice dripping with contempt. 12 systems dare to threaten an empire of thousands." The assembled officers erupted in harsh clicking sounds that served as their laughter. Grenk studied the star charts with satisfaction, noting how the Barnard's Reach system represented the perfect entry point into human space. In his 300 years of service, he had overseen the conquest of 47 species, and not one had posed significant resistance once the Empire committed its full might. "What do we know of their military capability?" asked Commander Thross, a tactical specialist whose species had surrendered after witnessing a single demonstration of Imperial firepower. "Practically nothing," Grenk replied with evident pleasure. "They operate merchant vessels, rescue ships, and diplomatic transports. Our intelligence suggests they purchase most technology from other species rather than developing their own. They have been part of galactic society for 40 years and never once engaged in offensive military action." On the far side of the galaxy, Admiral Rebecca Stone stood in the Mars Command Center, her expression carefully neutral as she watched the Empire fleet movements on her own displays. The room around her hummed with quiet efficiency, a stark contrast to the boisterous arrogance of the Imperial War Council. Beside her, General David Mills studied troop deployment patterns, while Dr. Patricia Wung analyzed the quantum signatures of the approaching armada. "They're treating this like a parade route," Mills observed, his voice tight with controlled anger. "No evasive formations, no advanced scouts, just a straight line toward our border." Stone allowed herself a brief moment of sadness for what was about to happen. Humanity had worked so hard to avoid this exact scenario, spending 4 decades building relationships through trade, offering humanitarian aid to species in need, and mediating conflicts that might have escalated into system-wide wars. They had deliberately cultivated an image of peaceful merchants and skilled diplomats, hoping never to reveal what lay beneath. 48 hours until they crossed the boundary," Wung reported, her fingers dancing across haptic controls. "All Sentinel platforms are in position and awaiting final authorization." The Sentinel network represented humanity's greatest secret and deepest shame. Built in the aftermath of the resource wars that had nearly destroyed Earth, these automated defense platforms incorporated technology that made current galactic standard weapons look like primitive projectile throwers. They had remained dormant for 35 years, hidden in plain sight as navigation beacons and communication relays, waiting for a threat that everyone had hoped would never materialize. Stone activated her command console and began the authentication sequence for Protocol Ragnarok. Her biometrics were scanned 7 different ways, her neural pattern verified against archived records, and her voice print analyzed for signs of coercion. This was not a decision one person could make alone, but as the ranking military officer in the solar system, her authorization began the cascade that would soon require confirmation from civilian leadership. Back aboard the Sovereign Reach, Emperor Valth himself appeared via quantum-entangled hologram, his massive form towering over the assembled commanders. The Emperor belonged to a species that had evolved on a high-gravity world, giving him a natural advantage in physical intimidation that he leveraged ruthlessly in political matters. "The humans have given us an opportunity," Valth declared, his voice resonating through the chamber. "Their defiance allows us to demonstrate what happens to those who refuse imperial benevolence. Fleet Admiral Grenk, you will take 300 warships across their border at precisely the moment their ultimatum expires. You will disable their defensive installations and prepare their systems for annexation." Grenk bowed deeply, his chest swelling with pride at being chosen for such a historic mission. The conquest of Earth would cement his legacy as one of the Empire's greatest military leaders. He had already begun planning the victory celebrations and composing the official reports that would detail how easily the human resistance had crumbled. "What if they actually have hidden defenses?" Thros asked quietly, his tactical mind unable to completely dismiss the possibility. "Then we will destroy them," Grank replied simply. "No species that small can withstand the might we bring to bear. Their warning is desperation, nothing more." The holographic display shifted to show the approaching deadline, counting down in standard galactic time units. Less than 2 cycles remained before the Empire fleet would cross into the Terran exclusion zone, a boundary that humanity had carefully negotiated during their initial contact with galactic civilization. At the time, many species had considered the humans paranoid for insisting on such a large buffer zone around their 12 systems. On Mars, Stone received confirmation from Earth. President Anderson had consulted with the United Assembly, and the vote had been unanimous. Humanity would defend its borders with whatever force necessary. The species that had nearly destroyed itself learning the cost of war would now teach that lesson to those who refused to learn it peacefully. "Activate the Sentinel network," Stone ordered, her voice steady despite the weight of what those words meant. "Full defensive posture. Rules of engagement are graduated response starting with warning shots. We show them we're serious without immediately going to lethal force." Across human space, ancient platforms that had masqueraded as civilian infrastructure began powering up. Their quantum cores hummed to life, their targeting systems came online, and their weapons arrays emerged from concealed housings. In the depths of space where no sensors could detect them, thousands of automated guardians prepared to do what they were built for. The Empire was about to learn why humanity had avoided war for 40 years. Not because they were weak, but because they understood exactly how terrible they could be when given no other choice. The final warning had been issued, the line had been drawn, and soon the galaxy would discover what happened when giants were forced to wake. Fleet Admiral Grank watched his tactical display with growing anticipation as the Eternal Dominion led 299 warships toward the coordinates that marked humanity's declared boundary. The formation moved in perfect parade order, each vessel maintaining precise spacing that demonstrated imperial discipline and coordination. This was more than a military operation. It was a statement of inevitable conquest. "All ships report ready status," his communications officer announced. "Weapon systems are charged, shields at maximum, and targeting solutions are locked on the human navigation beacons ahead." Grank nodded with satisfaction. Intelligence reports indicated those beacons were the extent of human defensive infrastructure in this region. Once they were eliminated, the path to Earth would be clear. He had already composed most of his official report, describing how the mighty Imperial Armada had swept aside token resistance to claim another prize for the Emperor. What Grank and his commanders did not know was that those navigation beacons were anything but simple civilian equipment. Each one housed a Sentinel platform, and each Sentinel platform contained more computing power than the entire Imperial fleet combined. They had been watching, calculating, and preparing since the moment the Empire ships entered scanner range. Deep in the lunar regolith beneath Mars Command Center, Dr. Patricia Wung monitored the quantum signatures of awakening systems with a mixture of professional pride and personal dread. She had spent 15 years maintaining the Sentinel network, running diagnostics on weapons that she hoped would never fire in anger. The platforms used predictive algorithms that analyzed everything from engine harmonics to crew shift patterns, building probability maps of enemy actions before those actions were even decided. "Sentinels report full readiness," she informed Admiral Stone. "Quantum entanglement is stable across all nodes. Targeting solutions are updating in real time." Stone stood with her hands clasped behind her back, watching the main display as the Empire fleet drew closer to the boundary. Beside her, General Mills coordinated with ground forces across human space, preparing for the possibility that some Imperial ships might break through the defensive perimeter. It was a remote possibility given what the Sentinels could do, but military doctrine demanded preparation for every scenario. Across neutral space, Ambassador Liss of the Teethrani Collective watched the same data feeds with growing anxiety. Her species had been part of galactic civilization for 3,000 years, long enough to witness countless wars and numerous empires rise and fall. Something about this situation felt different, though she could not articulate exactly what triggered her concern. The collective should intervene, urged one of her advisors, a young diplomat who still believed in the power of words to stop violence. "We voted against intervention 6 hours ago," Liss replied sadly. "The Empire has powerful allies on the Council, and humanity refused our offer of military support. They insist on handling this themselves." "Then we will witness a massacre," the advisor said. Liss was not so certain. She had made a study of Earth history during her years as ambassador to human space, and what she had learned troubled her deeply. Humanity had nearly exterminated itself in a series of global conflicts before finally achieving unity. They understood war in ways that species like the Teethrani, who had never experienced true planetary conflict, could not fully grasp. The Imperial vanguard reached the boundary marker at precisely the calculated moment. Grenk smiled as his lead destroyer, the Fist of Dominance, crossed into the Terran exclusion zone without incident. He was about to order the full fleet forward when his tactical display erupted with warnings. A single navigation beacon, unremarkable in every scan they had conducted, suddenly generated an energy signature that should have been impossible for something so small. Before the destroyer's shields could even register the threat, a beam of coherent energy struck the ship's main drive assembly with surgical precision. The weapon did not punch through the hull or detonate the reactor. It simply fused every component of the propulsion system into useless slag. The Fist of Dominance went from full combat speed to dead stop in 3 seconds. Emergency alarms shrieked across all decks as the crew struggled to understand what had just happened. Their shields had not been penetrated, their hull remained intact, but they were now helpless and drifting. "What was that?" Grenk demanded, his confidence evaporating as he processed the implications. "How did they target our engines through active shielding?" No one on his bridge had an answer. The weapon technology required to achieve such precision was theoretical, something that top Imperial scientists claimed might be possible in another 1,000 years of development. Yet the humans had just demonstrated it casually as a warning shot. Stone's voice came through on all Imperial frequencies, calm and utterly without compromise. "This is Admiral Rebecca Stone of Terran High Command. You have crossed our declared boundary after being explicitly warned of the consequences. You have one opportunity to withdraw your forces. The next response will not be as gentle." Grenk felt rage replace his shock. The humans dared to threaten him after a lucky shot against a single destroyer. He would show them the full might of Imperial firepower. "All ships, advance and engage. Destroy those beacons and anything else in our path." Stone watched the Imperial fleet surge forward and allowed herself a small sigh. They had been warned, given every chance to turn back offered the dignity of retreat. Now they would learn. "All Sentinels to active status," she ordered. "Rules of engagement, disable all hostile vessels, minimize casualties but protect our space." The navigation beacons that Grenk had dismissed as civilian infrastructure revealed their true nature. Stealth fields dropped away to show platforms bristling with weapons that analyzed, predicted, and fired faster than organic minds could process. The Empire had brought 300 ships to conquer humanity. Humanity had been quietly building and positioning 3,000 defensive platforms over 4 decades. The galaxy was about to receive an education in the difference between those who fought because they wanted to, and those who fought because they had no choice left. The first 90 seconds of engagement rewrote everything the galaxy thought it knew about human capability. Sentinel platforms opened fire with weapons that ignored conventional physics, their targeting so precise that Imperial crews initially thought their own systems were malfunctioning. 47 warships found themselves crippled before Grenk could even process what was happening. The beams did not explode through shields in spectacular fashion. Instead, they simply appeared on the other side, having somehow bypassed energy barriers that should have been impenetrable. Propulsion systems melted, weapon arrays fused into useless metal, and communication systems fried in cascading failures. Yet crew compartments remained untouched, life support continued functioning, and not a single Imperial sailor died. "Impossible," Grenk whispered, watching his formation dissolve into chaos. "Nothing can target that selectively through military-grade shielding." Commander Thros was already running analysis on the attack patterns, his tactical mind refusing to accept defeat even as the evidence surrounded him. "Admiral, they are not just reacting to our movements. They are predicting them. Watch how they fire at where our ships will be, not where they are." Grenk saw it then, the terrible truth that Thros had identified. The human weapons were not simply faster or more powerful. They were smarter. Every evasive maneuver his ships attempted had been calculated and countered before the order was even given. The platforms were reading engine output, analyzing crew response times, and building probability maps faster than organic brains could think. Aboard the Eternal Dominion, panic spread through the crew as they realized their proud warship was nothing more than a target in a shooting gallery designed by beings who understood violence on a level they could not match. Grenk's communications officer received reports from across the fleet, each more desperate than the last. Dreadnought crushing victory reports total propulsion failure. Carrier Endless Glory has lost all weapons capability. Destroyer Swift Retribution is tumbling. Their stabilization systems are gone. The list continued, a litany of defeat that seemed impossible given the overwhelming numerical advantage they had brought to this confrontation. General Mills watched the battle unfold from Mars Command with grim satisfaction. This was exactly what the Sentinels had been designed to do, and they were performing flawlessly. "Casualty reports?" Stone asked, though she already knew the answer. "Minimal," Mills replied. 17 injuries from impact when ships lost artificial gravity, 3 cases of severe stress reactions, 0 fatalities. The platforms are following doctrine perfectly. Stone nodded, grateful that the weapons were being used as intended. Humanity had built the Sentinels with a specific philosophy in mind. Overwhelming force applied with surgical precision to end conflicts before they could escalate into the kind of total warfare that had nearly destroyed Earth. Every disabled ship represented sailors who would go home to their families, who would tell others what happened when you threatened humanity. Dr. Wang pulled up communication intercepts from the Imperial fleet, translating the various alien languages into text that scrolled across multiple screens. The intercepted messages revealed confusion, fear, and growing mutiny, as crews realized their leaders had led them into a battle they could not win. "Several ships are requesting permission to surrender," Wang reported. "Grenk is denying the requests and threatening to execute any captain who breaks formation." That changed the equation entirely. Stone had been content to disable ships and send the Empire home with a lesson learned. But if Grenk was willing to sacrifice his own people rather than admit defeat, more aggressive measures would be necessary. She opened a direct channel to the Eternal Dominion. "Fleet Admiral Grenk, this is your final warning. Order your ships to power down and prepare for repatriation. Continued resistance will be met with escalation." Grenk's response came through choked with rage and humiliation. "You think you have won because you surprised us with hidden weapons. The Empire has thousands of ships. We will burn your worlds to ash." "You were warned," Stone replied, her voice cold. "You crossed our border, you threatened our people, and now you will face the consequences of your arrogance." She closed the channel and activated the next phase of defensive protocols. If Grenk wanted to see what humanity could really do, she would show him. "Bring the defense fleet out of stealth," she ordered. Across human space, warships that had been hiding under advanced cloaking fields dropped their concealment. These were not automated platforms, but fully crewed vessels, each one representing the pinnacle of human engineering. They had been positioned throughout the solar system for exactly this scenario, waiting for the moment when warning shots were no longer sufficient. Ambassador Liss gasped as her sensors registered the new contacts. 83 human warships appeared on her displays, each one larger than anything the Empire had brought to the fight. The collective's military analysts immediately began calculating the power requirements for ships of that size, and the numbers made no sense. "How did they hide that many capital ships?" her advisor asked. "Our sensors should have detected them." "They did not want us to know," Liss replied, understanding dawning. "Everything we have seen of humanity for 40 years has been carefully managed. They showed us merchants and diplomats while building this in secret. The question is why?" The answer came from her own studies of Earth history. Humanity had learned through terrible experience that the best way to prevent war was to be so overwhelmingly prepared for it that no rational enemy would ever attack. They had not hidden their military capability out of deception, but out of hope that they would never need to reveal it. The human defense fleet began moving into formation, their approach coordinated with the Sentinel platforms to create overlapping fields of fire that left no escape routes. Grenk watched them come and finally understood the magnitude of his error. He had brought 300 ships to conquer a species that could field thousands of defensive platforms and nearly 100 capital ships. The Empire had not stumbled into a minor conflict with a weak species. They had awakened something that should have been left sleeping. Fleet Admiral Christopher Hayes stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, watching tactical displays that showed the remnants of Grenk's fleet drifting helplessly in space. His ship and the 82 others in the Terran defense fleet had dropped out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation, a demonstration of coordination that should have required decades of practice. "Open channels to all Imperial vessels," Hayes ordered, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded fleets since before many of the Empire sailors were born. "This is Fleet Admiral Christopher Hayes of the Terran Defense Fleet. You have 30 seconds to power down all remaining weapons systems and prepare for repatriation." Grenk's response came immediately, defiant despite his impossible situation. "The Empire does not surrender to primitives. We will fight until—" Hayes cut him off with a gesture, signaling his weapons officer to provide a demonstration. The Indomitable's main cannon fired once, a beam of energy that made the Sentinel weapons look gentle by comparison. It struck an asteroid 300 kilometers away and converted the entire mass into expanding plasma in less than a second. "That was a rock," Hayes stated calmly. "The next target will be your flagship's weapons array. You have 20 seconds remaining to comply." The silence from the Eternal Dominion stretched for 15 of those seconds before Grenk finally gave the order his pride had been fighting. "All ships, power down weapons and shields, prepare for repatriation." Hayes nodded to his communications officer, satisfied that the immediate crisis had been resolved without further violence. What happened next would determine whether this conflict remained a localized incident or escalated into a full-scale war. "Transmit humanitarian frequencies to all Imperial ships. Any crew members requiring medical attention will be treated by our medical teams." The offer seemed to confuse the Empire sailors more than the overwhelming defeat they had just suffered. Their entire military doctrine was built around conquest and domination, concepts that left no room for compassion toward defeated enemies. Yet here were the humans, offering medical care to those who had come to destroy them. On Mars, Admiral Stone received updated intelligence that made her blood run cold. Emperor Valth had not accepted the defeat of his forward fleet, and was instead mobilizing the core Imperial Armada. 2,000 warships were being pulled from garrison duty across the Empire and directed toward Earth itself. "He's going to try to overwhelm us with numbers," General Mills observed, studying the deployment patterns. "Even with our technological advantage, engaging that many ships simultaneously will be challenging." Stone considered the strategic situation carefully. Humanity had spent 4 decades avoiding this exact scenario, hoping that peaceful coexistence would be possible. But the Empire's leadership had mistaken restraint for weakness, and now they were about to learn the full cost of that error. "Activate the full Terran defense grid," she ordered. "Every platform, every ship, every installation. I want them to see exactly what they are facing before they commit to this course of action." Across human space, the true scale of Earth's defenses began to reveal themselves. Weapons platforms that had been disguised as civilian infrastructure powered up, ship berths hidden inside asteroids open to disgorge additional vessels, and defensive systems that had been dormant for decades came online. What had seemed like 12 lightly defended systems transformed into a fortress that made Imperial strategists reconsider everything they thought they knew about warfare. Ambassador Liss watched the transformation with a mixture of awe and deep concern. The collective sensors were detecting energy signatures that suggested humanity had been building this defense network since before they made first contact with galactic civilization. This was not a reaction to Imperial aggression. It was preparation that had been ongoing for generations. "They knew," her chief analyst said quietly. "Before they ever left their solar system, they knew what they would face out here, and they prepared for it." Liss nodded slowly, understanding the implications. Humanity had emerged from their world carrying scars from conflicts that had nearly destroyed them. They had looked at the stars and decided that whatever existed out there, they would never again be caught unprepared. The result was a military capability that exceeded anything the current galactic powers possessed. Emperor Valth received the sensor reports from his remaining scouts near human space, and for the first time in his long reign, he felt something approaching doubt. The analysts were showing him defensive installations numbering in the tens of thousands, ship deployments that suggested Earth alone could field more combat-ready vessels than the entire Imperial Armada. "These readings must be false," he declared, though his voice carried less certainty than before. "They are projecting false signatures to make us think they have more strength than they actually possess." His chief military advisor, a grizzled veteran who had survived more battles than most species had fought, shook his head slowly. "Your Majesty, our intelligence services have been analyzing human capabilities since they joined galactic society. Every assessment concluded they were peaceful merchants with minimal military capability. Every assessment was deliberately fed false information." "You are saying they tricked us?" Valth demanded. "I am saying they tricked everyone," the advisor replied. "The question is no longer whether we can defeat them. The question is whether we can afford to try." Valth stared at the tactical displays showing his assembled armada, 2,000 ships representing the concentrated might of the Empire. Under normal circumstances, such a force could reduce entire planetary systems to rubble. But these were not normal circumstances, and humanity was proving to be anything but a normal species. "Prepare the fleet," he finally ordered. "We will offer them terms. They have proven their strength. Now we will see if they have the wisdom to negotiate rather than fight." It was the closest thing to a retreat that an emperor could order without losing face, and everyone in the command chamber understood the significance. Humanity had achieved in one battle what no other species had managed in 3 centuries of imperial expansion. They had made the Empire blink. Emperor Valth's offer to negotiate arrived at Mars' command 6 hours after his armada finished assembling at the edge of the Terran exclusion zone. Admiral Stone read the message twice before sharing it with her staff, noting how carefully the language avoided any admission of wrongdoing while suggesting that perhaps a diplomatic solution could be reached. "He wants to save face," General Mills observed. "He is offering to withdraw his forces if we agree to certain territorial concessions and trade agreements heavily weighted in the Empire's favor." "In other words," Dr. Wung added, "he wants us to reward him for threatening us." Stone considered the offer carefully, aware that her response would set the tone for Earth's relationship with the galaxy for generations to come. Humanity could accept the terms, avoid further bloodshed, and return to their careful diplomacy. Or they could make it absolutely clear that threatening Earth carried consequences beyond military defeat. "Draft a response," Stone ordered. "The terms are simple. The Empire will withdraw all forces from our borders, Emperor Valth will stand trial for war crimes before a neutral tribunal, and reparations will be paid to cover the cost of our defensive mobilization. Anything less is unacceptable." Mills raised an eyebrow at the boldness of the demands. "They will never agree to putting their emperor on trial." "Then they will learn what happens when negotiations fail," Stone replied calmly. The response was transmitted on all frequencies, ensuring that every species in the galaxy could hear Earth's position. Ambassador Liss read it from her position in neutral space and felt a mixture of admiration and concern. Humanity was not simply defending their territory, they were establishing a new precedent for how aggression would be addressed. "The collective must support this," Liss told her council. "If the Empire can threaten Earth without facing justice, then no species is safe from imperial expansion." The debate that followed was intense, with some council members arguing that antagonizing the Empire would destabilize the entire galactic order. But Liss pressed her case, pointing out that the old order had already failed by allowing the Empire to grow so powerful that smaller species lived in constant fear. Emperor Valth's response to Earth's demands was predictable. He called them insulting, unreasonable, and proof that humanity sought to destabilize galactic peace. He ordered his armada to advance, confident that even the most advanced weapons could not stop 2,000 ships fighting with coordinated tactics. Fleet Admiral Hayes watched the Imperial Armada cross into the exclusion zone and activated the full defensive grid. What happened next would become required study in military academies across the galaxy for the next 1,000 years. The Terran Defense Fleet, supported by the Sentinel Network and planetary defense installations, engaged 2,000 Imperial warships in a battle that lasted 6 hours and resulted in 0 human casualties. The Empire forces fought with courage and determination, their crews following orders even as ship after ship was systematically disabled. Human weapons demonstrated capabilities that seemed impossible, phasing through shields, predicting evasive maneuvers, and striking with precision that left crews shaken but alive. Every attempt at coordinated assault was countered before it could develop. Every tactical innovation was anticipated and neutralized. By the 3rd hour, individual Imperial ship captains began requesting permission to surrender. By the 4th hour, entire squadrons were refusing orders to continue fighting. By the 6th hour, only Emperor Valth's flagship and 12 loyalist vessels remained in combat, and even they were fighting with damaged systems and exhausted crews. Hayes personally led the final operation to disable the Emperor's flagship, using minimal force to cripple the vessel without harming its crew. When Imperial Marines attempted to resist boarding parties, human soldiers demonstrated restraint that shocked observers. They used non-lethal weapons, provided immediate medical care to the wounded, and treated prisoners with dignity that seemed incomprehensible to species raised in the Empire's culture of domination. Emperor Valth was taken into custody without ceremony, his protests about diplomatic immunity falling on ears that had heard enough excuses. The war had ended not with the destruction of the Empire, but with the systematic dismantling of its ability to threaten Earth while preserving the lives of its sailors. 6 months later, the trial concluded with Valth convicted of war crimes and sentenced to imprisonment on a neutral world. The verdict was delivered by a tribunal that included representatives from 200 species, many of whom had suffered under imperial expansion but had lacked the power to resist. Earth's military action had created space for justice that diplomacy alone had never achieved. Admiral Stone stood before the Galactic Assembly, invited to address the gathered species about Earth's intentions following their demonstration of overwhelming power. She wore her dress uniform, but spoke in the simple, direct manner that humanity had always preferred. "We fought because we had to," she began. "We built weapons because we learned the cost of being unprepared. We showed mercy because we remember what it is like to be on the receiving end of merciless warfare." She paused, letting her words settle before continuing. "Earth does not seek empire or conquest. We seek only to live in peace and to ensure that others can do the same. The line we drew around our space was not the boundary of our ambition, but the limit of our tolerance for aggression." The assembly hall remained silent as she concluded. "We were warned once by our own history what war truly costs. We warned the Empire the same way. Some lessons can only be taught once, but we hope the galaxy has learned them now." In the year that followed, trade routes reopened. Former Empire worlds received reconstruction assistance from Earth, and a new galactic order began to emerge. Humanity became the de facto guarantor of peace, not through threat of conquest, but through demonstrated capability combined with restraint. The Sentinel network returned to dormancy, and Admiral Stone returned to hoping they would never be needed again. But she kept them ready, because hope alone had never been enough to prevent war. Strength, properly applied, had proven to be the foundation on which lasting peace could finally be built. The galaxy had learned that humanity drew lines for good reasons, and behind those lines stood the giants who had chosen to sleep but would always be ready to wake.